and we've denied the fact that fentanyl is being potentially manufactured in Canada. The evidence to that, if I were to again be scientific and police, is if you look at the seizures of drugs coming into the country, they're always pure. 100 pounds or kilos of cocaine coming in, pure. 100 kilos of heroin, pure. And they cut it in Canada.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everybody. Today we have another special guest on the show today, one that we've been trying to coordinate schedules to get on for a long time at this point. He was a Conservative candidate in one of the Oakville ridings and a former police officer, all around good guy and just beaming with integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Chisner, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate you coming on.
So we've been trying to get you on for a while, mainly because you were such an active campaigner even prior to the election being called. And, you know, we've come in contact with a few police officers and we've heard some of the stories at the events that you were at, and they're just heartbreaking hearing these stories. And we wanted to get your perspective of a bunch of things in Canada. So let's just zero in right away. Why did you end up deciding to run for the Conservative Party?
Great question. Actually, some people know this, but not a lot of people do, but some people were at the beginning. I was politically agnostic up until probably 2019, 2020. I was the average Canadian. I was working as a police officer. You know, my wife had a good job. We had young kids, you know, married. We were just focused on our everyday. And I became a police officer in 2006, but I've been working in policing since 2003. COVID happens, as everybody went through that. I was having a very different experience with COVID versus what I was seeing on TV. I was still in the streets of Rexdale during the height of it. Nothing changed there. People were still in the bus stop, still going to work, low income, low equity, high crime. They weren't represented. Child abuse went up, sexual assault went up, drug use and alcoholism went up, suicide went up, and nobody was talking about it. But I'm dealing with it every day. Right. And I was coming home watching the news, and that was the first time I actually had to watch the news, being politically agnostic. I didn't care. To now I'm looking at 10 a.m. to noon to what can I do today? You know, meanwhile, I'm working a night shift for 12 hours as a frontline guy in the front line. And you're looking at these guys and girls that are making these decisions, and I'm comparing my own reality with it as an expert in what I do. I'm like, there's something here that doesn't make sense. So I joined the Conservative Party federally and provincially. I just bought a membership. I joined my local boards just to say, you know, I knew a lot of politicians at that time. I already spoken to Liberal government at some points as a gang expert. I was talking about the organized crime crisis we had, but it was just lip service in my mind. Then I joined the board to be like, how do decisions get made provincially and federally? It was the only thing I knew how to do. I had a friend guide me to it. I joined the board. I was working in Peel Police. I was there for about a year. And first week of September 2022, I get a cold call. It's Pierre's team. Pierre was yet to be announced as the leader of the Conservative Party. I'd supported him, like I'd voted for him during the leadership run. I'd only been a member of the party for about 8 or 9 months, but I had a national reputation in my space. And Pierre's team calls me up and they said, look, we'd love to meet. So I met with Pierre. We had a basement conversation for about 2 hours, got to know each other. And ultimately, the area I was policing in Peel, Mississauga Lakeshore, Pierre was likely to become the leader of the party. And then by December, there was going to be a by-election. So the opportunity was there for him to say, look, we like what you stand for. We support you, love to have you part of a team. And I said yes, and I ran in that by-election, and it was a tough one, we lost. And then I stayed, maintained, and committed to the party. The whole goal of me getting in was to be able to platform out economic development, plus all the things we can do to strengthen families. And it wasn't an ask for new money, it was to redirect existing resources, because I know we could have saved a bunch of lives, and we could have improved the quality of life for a lot of people.
So that's an interesting story, especially because you didn't start out as Conservative. Like that's the interesting aspect of this, because a lot of people that we do talk to, they've kind of been Conservative, you know, from the beginning. So it's interesting that you were probably in that 47% of Canadians that don't align themselves with a political party. They're just trying to live their life. And just through your experience, you started seeing, well, wait a minute, there's a disconnect as to what I'm seeing in real life versus A, what I'm hearing on the quote unquote news, and B, what I'm hearing from the politicians in Ottawa and the decisions that they're making. So one of the things that is interesting is in that timeline that you went through, obviously we had Bill C-75 come through and the implementation of the principle of least restraint. We don't need to rehash that because we know what a disaster that's been. We hear about these stories every day. And during your campaign run in the last election, there was many horrific stories that would just bring people to tears. And we hear about them now, sadly, all over the country. We've had a Mark Carney government that has waited, in my opinion, far too long to introduce any sort of bail reform legislation. They have finally dropped Bill C-12 that aims to do this. In your knowledge of the bill, does it go far enough? And if not, does it do anything to improve the bail system in Canada?
Yeah, I think on its face it does some stuff that's going to improve the system, right? And I mean, there's some things in there where it should have been incorporated back today. And if you look at some of the line items of it, it's stuff people were begging for since 2020, both within politics and outside, being policing leaders and police unions. I mean, some of the stuff that's nice to see there is it allows police, for example, in certain circumstances to be able to identify a youth involved in a serious offense without a court order if it's found to be in the interest of public safety, which is huge because you don't have a lot of time. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is younger and younger killers. Okay, but we've seen, and this is forgotten about, just last summer we had 2 seniors killed by 2 14-year-olds randomly, stabbings, horrible ways. The police need to seek a court order to be able to identify the person potentially accused of this. This is going to allow for the power of speed, which is what we need to do there. The other parts of it, they're trying to address, the systems in play to be able to say, they're trying to toughen bail laws and put more onus onto the person. That already existed before Bill C-75, by the way. There was 3 grounds we'd have to utilize before letting somebody out, which already existed, which were somewhat removed, but also devalued during Bill C-75, and now it looks like they're revoking back to. Those ultimately were, what is the evidence and the severity of the offense? Like, did we catch the guy on video killing somebody? Like, that's pretty strong. Things like having it on a random victim or a stranger, which was incorporated in Sean Fraser's new bill. I think that's a good idea. That does matter when it's a random person versus a known person or a targeted person, because it could be anybody, and that's the danger to public safety. So public safety always comes into account. And then we have to look at, is the person likely to flee the country and not show up in court, which is something we already had. But all that stuff is just being remarketed and rebranding into something new. Now look, there's some positive aspects, there's some negative aspects, and the negative aspects tend to be similar to what they've incorporated in the budget. I know we're not there yet, but it is similar to say, it looks good on paper, but we have to look at what this looks like in real life when it gets executed. The ability to bring into this almost negates all of their arguments. Their arguments prior to any of this, when they were pushing back against Bill C-75 and bail reform, was that this is a provincial issue. Provinces don't have enough courts, they don't have enough jails, and that's what we've done. But they haven't addressed any of that in this new piece of legislation, nor in the funding mechanisms. They talk about infrastructure. Nobody in there specifies funding to deal with this issue.
That's a really good point, because you're right. One of their main arguments is, well, it's not the legislation's problem. It's the fact that, the previous Conservative government defunded prisons and all of this stuff. But to your point, okay, if that is the case, let's accept your argument. Where is that in the 2025 budget? Because if that's your argument, then you would expect that Sean Fraser would have lobbied Mark Carney to set aside billions of dollars in there to beef up the prison system, but that's not there.
It's not there, and we have different levels of prison systems. You have federal, you have provincial, like those matter on there, and if the pushback is, well, it's the province's fault, and they've done a good job at this being, I say that lightly, I don't mean a good job, is the Liberal government during the last couple years, when things have gone right in law enforcement, they're the first to step up and say, look what we did. Joint effort, comprehensive approach. When things have gone bad, they've also been the first to say, this is not our responsibility. The administration of justice is done at the provincial level. Well, it's not our fault. We're doing what we can. The legislation represents the issues there. So it's this push and pull narrative. So whenever I see these line items and recommendations on legislation, let's say that it works amazingly well to keep violent offenders in custody. We still haven't dealt with the fact that their sentences are going to get reduced because they're going to utilize the current jail system and prison system to say, these were unsanitary and unsafe conditions for me, and they'll get heightened sentencing, aggravating factors. They'll get a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1. So it's going to minimize their actual time in the system. We're going to bloat the system even more. No recognition of that, and they're going to continue to replicate this cycle. Nor does that in there recognize or address the ongoing issues of why we have such a crime problem in the first place. We're not getting to the actual root cause, which is ironic because liberals are always known as root cause solution people. Like, what are the social issues on there? It's never spoken about. They're not talking about drug addiction. They're not talking about the infiltration of organized crime and cartels and terrorist organizations in the country. They're not talking about how Canada has become an international money laundering hub and drug operating hub, or the fact that we're now going to become a manufacturing hub for fentanyl as a result of the cartel and the CCP trying to get cut out of the system. There's almost no recognition of that. So all of these things that we're building don't deal with the real issues that we're going to have. And it's the sad part is we're going to continue to see more and more victimization of innocent people. And that's the issue I had was, if you were to ask me 20 years ago, we'd get somebody who was shot, in a hard-hit community, and you would look at them and there'd be a track record, there'd be a criminal record. You would have said a gang member, this was a drive-by shooting, they were a suspect in another homicide. Now we get a victim, it's an innocent person. And it's because drugs and guns have infiltrated our community and our country. The reason why it's important to pay attention to drugs is because drugs is the economic mover in the underworld. Okay, there's two aspects of it now, drugs and human trafficking. Human trafficking being often found in the form of sex trafficking. And when people think of sex trafficking victims, they're as young as 10. And when people think of them, they think it happens to that community. Guys, I hate to break it to you, it's every community that gets roped into this. And the evolution of that ultimately, in my mind, had to do with the Liberal government's past tenure. And I'm trying not to be too focused on the past, but it's important to understand the history of how we got here.
Well, and from just my cursory view, cartels don't seem to do well in wealthy countries. And that's because people don't need an alternative for quote unquote income in order to actually thrive in life. And when we look, 20 years ago, Canada was not a country that you would consider a poor country. We're supposed to be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. That's why we're part of the G7, allegedly now. But now we're seeing all these cartels come in, and we're seeing this rise in crime. We're seeing this rise in drug trafficking, in drug use. It's no wonder in that our per capita GDP is falling, meaning our standard of living is falling, and crime is increasing because people either can't get a job or the job that they do get doesn't pay for the bills anymore because of how expensive everything's gotten. So, what does that lead people to do? Well, people get desperate. They turn to crime, and, they need an employer, and that's where the cartels come into play. And when you see this and you see that the RCMP doesn't seem to deal with organized crime seriously, the Liberals don't deal with organized crime seriously, and you have foreign interference being, waved around by CSIS and saying that we're a hotbed for foreign interference because they can operate at a very low risk level. It's no wonder that all of these countries are looking at Canada to do business because there's no one to stop them.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, foreign interference. When I read the NSCOP report, as best of my memory, there was no specific definition of what foreign interference is. It was very vague, and that was one of the issues they brought up as well. What is foreign interference? The reason why it's important to have a definition of that legally is because it turns on triggers. Yeah. Because we need to be able to really know what are we attacking here. You can't just say cancer because we don't know how to even remedy it. You have to say what type of cancer. Is it leukemia? Is it like throat cancer? Like what type of cancer for us to remedy it? Right now, it's just foreign interference. It's this blanket catch-all, which is a huge issue. And if you kind of look at where we are, like in an economy as a whole, and this is kind of part of why I left social media for a little bit. Look, I'm coming back, just not any rush. It'll be in a couple of weeks. I'll probably be back in a little bit of a more positive outlook. But the reason I got off was I felt like it was important for me to step away for a little bit, just to reset. Because, you brought up earlier and you said, look, I wasn't like a traditional conservative guy. Yeah, look, I voted local. I wanted to know my candidate, and if I liked the person, I would vote for whoever that person was. That's how I based everything off of, because I didn't grow up in a family that was overly politically involved. My parents were just struggling, man. They were working factory jobs. They didn't know the language. They had 4 kids. They went through bankruptcy early on. Politics was not an immediate concern for us, and I feel like that's happening all over the country, where they have such a hard economic struggle for everybody now. And I don't care if you're a billionaire or you're poor by objective men, everybody's feeling it. So everybody's kind of looking inward. And, you know, I was involved in the political circle. I still am. I'm still involved with the Conservative Party in Pierre. We become friends. And, you know, I support the guy. He gave me an opportunity when nobody did. So I'm always going to have that sense of friendship and loyalty to him. But when you look at it, to your point of all these things, the reason I bring up crime so much is because crime and economy are the same thing. They're brother and sister, right? You cannot find a country in this world that's doing really well economically and they're also unsafe. Doesn't exist. Look at Dubai, for example, right? People know you can leave a gold bar on your Mercedes in Dubai, nobody's touching it. It's also a hotbed of economy, and they're really attracting major people to come there because the quality of life is high and it makes business easy to do there. You don't have to worry about it. But then you go to other countries where there's no economy, crime is high. It's run by warlord organizations, guerrilla machines, cartels. So it matters for the overall quality of life. What I found was happening was Canadians, and I feel like this last election was it, is I think we have a generation of Canadians that forgot that life was good. We've had 10 years of this. It's just beat you down slowly and slowly and slowly, and people have accepted having to have two jobs. People have accepted savings doesn't exist anymore. They've accepted that their kids might have to go to university or college in another country, which is crazy to me. You know, my parents left a country and came here in 1970 and landed in Toronto, not knowing the language. Their education wasn't valued, and they worked in factory jobs with the intent of giving us a better life. And my life is way better than my parents' life would ever be. It is. It worked for them. But now I'm at the stage where I don't know if my kid's life is going to be better than mine, or if I can recommend that they stay in this country if it continues to go the way that it does.
And a lot of Canadians feel that way because they've actually done some recent surveys, and Nanos has a recurring survey that they do. And this is one of the first times that parents are actually responding that their children are not going to have a life that's better than theirs.
It's not, and that's a problem. Yeah. Like, I feel like a failure as a parent, and I don't know what else I need to do. Look, I have a great job now. I resigned from policing 2.5 years ago to pursue politics, and I work in the private sector. I work in finance and technology, so I got a great job. I do cool things, but that doesn't matter because what I still am not going to be able to do enough to give my kids a life that they want. And then additionally, realistically, let's be real, like Canadian kids can't compete as well as kids coming from other countries sometimes academically. You know, India and China, for example, where it's so competitive academically. You know, I learned this in the last election. It's so competitive academically in these other countries that, you know, there's this idea, and it's important to address, people don't just come to Canada because the immigration system is lax. Yeah, we have problems with it, but they're coming to Canada because it's a safe country. It's a country that's better where they're from, and our public education system is better than private school where they are. So we're sought after. Our proximity to the U.S., we're by a consumer nation. They have skills, but they also know when they come here, their kids can dominate. And it's the truth. If you look at some of these academic schools in every region, it's like, who are the guys getting 100%, 101%? It's generally, it's kids, in my experience, in my opinion, come from these other places because it's all academia. There is no option here. Canada, we had options. You know, our kids didn't need to get 90s. We focused on having them in rep sports and rounding them out. But as you get out and the world changes, they're going to lose out on opportunities here because it's the future, sadly, and in some degree, is all tech. Now, you still need people to sell your product or sell your service, which is the social skill side of it. But now when I'm looking at my kids and they're doing their best and they're trying hard and I've raised good kids as, you know, as best as I can, I'm not thinking as a Canadian. I'm not thinking as a politician. I'm thinking as a dad. I don't want my kids to do that. I don't want my kids to work two jobs. I want my kids to be able to afford a home. I hate saying those catchy lines, but it's true. I want them to be able to work a job that they enjoy and love, be able to get married and not worried about having kids. I want grandkids one day. It's very important to me. I want them to live a life. I want them to be able to go to dinner, afford a nice car, go on family vacations. I don't know where that happens.
Well, and this is the sad thing, right, is these didn't used to be dreams of parents, you know, for their kid to own their own home. That was a given. It was expected. It was, when are you going to buy your own house? When are you going to get married?
When are you going to give me grandkids?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
When?
Now it's a question of affordability. So now this is the sad part of Canadian history where these are the dreams of parents. Not, I hope my child is going to be a doctor. I hope my child, you know, is going to be prime minister. I hope my child is you know, going to be a lawyer. Those aren't the dreams of parents anymore because they can't dream that big.
No.
They just have to be able to dream, my kid is not going to have to live with me.
Yeah. You just have to dream 24 hours at a time now.
And to your point, people have slowly been forced to accept that. And we shouldn't accept that. We should not accept that as a country. And the average Canadian shouldn't accept that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's why I stayed politically involved. The reason I bring it up is not to say that there's no hope. Is there's hope. This is, in my mind, a fixable problem, and I try to be as neutral as possible, even though I'm wearing a political banner. But I still try to maintain that, which is also why I pull back sometimes from social media, and I pull back from even political events. It's because I don't want to get caught in that either, because I think that's dangerous to just caught up in this hive mind. I've been around long enough and other things to know, hey, when everybody around you is thinking and doing the same thing, like, dude,
check yourself.
One of the things you say is never believe your own hype.
Yeah.
What am I missing? So I'll step back and I'll just go live a normal life. And I could tell you, even just being off of social media for 2 months now, the everyday people, they're not watching this because they're worried. Okay, like they are worried. Like, is my job going to be around tomorrow? Who's going to pick up and drop off my kids from school today? If you have kids in programs, like how am I going to afford this? Similar to what you guys are going through. And then additionally, we have aging parents. That how do we deal with all of this stuff? So when you talk to them about these bills and all that stuff, they're like, I'm not interested, man. They're burnt out. They're fatigued. But this is where I said it's kind of those things where it's hard for people to find hope. They're just looking at 24 hours at a time. And I don't want to say it's 100% the Liberals' fault, only because I don't want to be negative about it. And I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, because I'm ignorantly believing that everybody has their best intent at heart. Okay, I'm going to believe that I don't agree with what they did, but I will believe that when they did this, they thought it was going to work out differently in the right way. And then I think there's a layer of denial where when it didn't go in, that, oh my God, we put so many eggs in this basket. How do we save face? How does this not get used in a PR or marketing campaign politically against us? When in reality, they could save and improve a lot of lives, but it becomes, what's the damage to the political system and the party versus doing the right thing? And doing the right thing is the biggest thing.
And this is where it's a test of real leadership, right? Because, I've been in leadership positions, you've been in leadership positions, and the number one thing that separates a great leader from a bad leader is accountability, and standing up and saying, you know what, we made a mistake here, but we're going to fix it. And, all that's going to do is earn trust, in my opinion.
Yeah, people accept it.
Yeah, and they will say, you know what, that's good, because now I know if this person, if this team, if this party makes a mistake, I know there's a strong likelihood that they're actually going to stand up and say, yes, this is what happened, and we're going to correct it, and we're going to fix it. I will trust that they will do that. But this brings us to the budget, because I think you raised a lot of good points of what the average Canadian is feeling like. Are they thinking about Bill C-12, C-9, C-8? No. The political junkies are, 100%. And the people that are really into politics, they are. But the average Canadian that is working their two jobs, trying to just get by, they have no idea what this is. And this is what led to the 47% of Canadians that cast an uninformed vote in the last election. That's why we ended up with the government that we did, because they don't pay attention to this stuff. They don't know about the STTC scandal. They don't know about IRADCAN. They don't know about any of this stuff. But this is where I think it's really going to come back to bite the Liberals, because this budget of Mark Carney doesn't address what the average Canadian is going through every day. They're not addressing what the average Canadian is thinking in the next 24 hours. How am I going to, buy my home? How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to afford my groceries? All of the measures that they put in, it's kind of pie in the sky, anti-Trump, and solutions that are 3, 4, 5 years away. Canadians don't have that amount of time, and I think that might come back to bite the Liberals in the spring, because we will be now 1 year from the time Carney was first made Prime Minister, and the average Canadian is going to look up and say, well, wait a minute, nothing's done.
Yeah. You bring up a couple good points, because the whole thing was very, not surprising, but I've been really surprised with the response from the media and the country. I'll tell you why. A year ago, roughly, give or take, a year ago, if everybody recalls, it was a really tense time in the country. It was before the American elections. They were going to table the last deficit, and Chrystia Freeland wakes up and resigns. Okay, makes national headlines. There was a ton of pressure on the Liberal government at the time, Justin Trudeau. And then Karina Gould comes in and drops the budget and walks out and doesn't give anybody time. She played the system. She said, these are the rules, which doesn't allow for questioning. She just dropped it and left it and walked back, and there was nobody there. I think maybe one or two people from the Liberal Party sitting in those. And you see every other party being like, give us a chance to attack this. This is crazy. Like, this is what a time we're in. We can't do this. It's not ethical. And that forced the government to prorogue, because at that time it went from, I think it was a 40 billion to a 60 billion deficit, right? So it was a $20 billion a year ago, made the finance minister resign. They played the rules to never be questioned on it, and it pushed the prime minister to not only prorogue government and freeze it, but to also ultimately resign, because it was such a mismanaged. And here we are a year later, and a budget gets tabled that's not 40 billion, that's not 78 billion, 80 billion dollars, but it's a full packed house in the House of Commons. It's an optimistic speech, and they've used words like investing and catalyze and whatever words they've used. It's a marketing effort on how do we communicate this and deliver this terrible news. And not only did they say that, they said, hey, for the next 5 years, we're going to do this. And we're going to continue to go in debt. And I think two things spark from that, from my own conversations with people outside of politics, not on social media, is one thing is the average person fairly at this time doesn't know the difference between spend and invest. To them, it's the same thing, because invest comes with the notion that of expendable income. Nobody has expendable income for the most of the Canadian. So there's this disconnect from there to be like, what do you mean spend it? You're spending my money. So I think it's creating that gap. And then the second part of that is those people who understand investment or are a little bit more well savvy in finance also recognize that every investment comes with an element of risk. That's why it's called an investment.
And there's usually return on that.
And there's a return on the investment. We don't know the risk or return on any of these investments. They've been sold and provided as if this is all going to work out, not taking into account how the global world works. Now, look, I think the infrastructure investments in terms of roads and infrastructure, yeah, we need to invest in infrastructure because we need the actual roadway for the economy to drive on. We need truck drivers to have good roads and imports. Yeah, that stuff. Defense, absolutely. The world's changed. We are a problem for a lot of places. If you look at the US, the original reasons for the tariffs on us was our security. We were a risk. They said, you're not taking yourself serious. You become a security threat for us. And we've denied the fact that fentanyl is being potentially manufactured in Canada. The evidence to that, if I were to again be scientific and police, is if you look at the seizures of drugs coming into the country, they're always pure. 100 pounds or kilos of cocaine coming in, pure. 100 kilos of heroin, pure. And they cut it in Canada. So it gets brought in, it gets cut in Canada off of the BC coast. CCP will bring it in, Cartel will manufacture with some local organized crime groups. But if you look at the seizures leaving Canada, fentanyl. There's more to this, and intelligence sources say the same thing. But to the point of that is if we look back at the budget, is the world has changed so quick. Ballot issues, like the war in the Middle East in the last election, are no longer a priority because it's been put to bed. Hopefully, knock on wood. I don't want to see anybody die. It's important that we have that established. But we don't know what new wars are going to come in, what new economic impacts. The use of AI, they mention it. What do you mean the use of AI? They just say we're going to incorporate AI. AI is its own machine. And then in turn of that, we don't have subject matter experts internally that I've seen that understand the space. I know AI subject matter experts have been doing this for 25 years. The depth of knowledge you need to understand to have that and know where it embeds itself in government is significant.
Well, the depth of knowledge, but what's even more is you have to be ready for it. You have to have an understanding of the foundational requirements to actually implement it in. And are your systems ready for it? You can't just plug AI into a 20-year-old system, which, newsflash, that's what the government has. Yeah. They are late to the game in everything technology-wise. So for them to just say, we're going to plug in AI, it's going to solve all our problems, that's not going to work. I know, I've worked there.
Yeah. Well, legacy systems. Right. Legacy systems and it's not, this is not a dig at them or anything, but people who've been in government for 25 years, they're cozy, they're comfy, they don't want any systems to change. And then the new thing is when you bring in new technology into any space, whether it's commercial or even industry, comes user adoption. Well, how do you incentivize people to use it? And it's always going to have its errors. People generally are going to deal with government, have an error one way and say, I'm just going to pick up the phone. I don't want to deal with this. This is hard. Like, have you tried paying your corporate taxes? It's a pain. It's not easy to pay corporate taxes.
Yes, we know.
It's not.
Like it is, and this is you saying, I want to give you money that I owe. It's not easy. So they just say, we're going to pump in this money to do it. They talk about capital investments, about $30 billion into the economy. Well, for that to work on the business side, and this is also why I peeled away from social a little bit, is people only knew me as a crime guy. Well, I'm also pretty okay with business. But if you look at the business side of things, So you have $30 billion for capital investments here, but Canada's not an attractive place for business to come into play. We're overtaxed here. It's really difficult actually to work with our government. You go try this for anybody watching at home and you have a business, just try this. And I'm not encouraging, I'm just saying have this experience. Reach out to an economic development of any state, which is under their governor. Send them a cold email. They'll probably respond to you in a couple of days and want to book a virtual meeting. Try lobbying the government or speaking to your local rep about presenting a solution from Canada to Canada. It's very difficult. 18 months, 19 months, 24 months, RFP, RFIs, sole source, ministers change, deputy ministers change. And the other part of that is our politicians, to some degree, don't have that much authority and executive decision-making within the operation itself. It's done by a bureaucrat who sits at like a director level. So you're fighting this machine, which makes it difficult to do. And if the government's going to give you this money, they're actually inducing line items into it, which don't give a lot of incentives to entrepreneurs to want to do it here. And in the age of tech, it doesn't matter where your headquarters is head up. You want to be in the most tax lucrative place because most people who run a business or operate a business, the outside world who's never been in entrepreneurship has this idea because it's been sold to them that if you have a company and you make $5 million a year, you're living on a yacht, and they're talking your like net revenue. They're not talking like, hey, what's my actual profit?
Yeah,
and
the OpEx. Yeah.
And then how much of this am I reinvesting back in to grow and scale my company, which is probably 90% of your money if you're an entrepreneur. So all that excess profit is coming back in for you to grow your company, and then also to hire and employ new people. And you have one solution, but you have 10 in the bucket. You have other current clients that like you. You want to sell. Canada, I feel like Canada doesn't understand that. The government doesn't understand that. This is how it works. So what I really liked was when Pierre had mentioned, hey, if you got a business in Canada, you pump in all your money, you're going to be exempt from capital gains. That's exactly how you grow an economy. But 100%. This current budget doesn't address that. It just says, here's money. And then I believe, if I've read it right, to address the youth unemployment, they want to do 175,000 placements. How are we going to achieve this?
We already have an unemployment rate.
Yeah.
So that's great to say that you're going to have placements. Where?
Is it going to be more government jobs?
Right.
And then the government, like you look at Canada as a whole, if I was an outsider, and again, I'm going to pull myself from the politics Canadian, just a business guy. I look at Canada and I'm in a specific industry, like auto, for example. They're limiting consumer choice, right? They're now saying we want you to go EV. When government limits consumer choice, it kills the market, because why would I come in, right? If you're limiting my choice, I can't even compete. You're outpricing me out of this group here. You're limiting it. So the cost of the good actually goes up because there's not that much competition now to fight for it. So you don't have to compete with anybody else. And then the quality of service to people shrinks. So all these kind of smaller things on the business scale, I don't want to bore everybody, but Canada's a really hard place to invest into right now, even for Canadians. And as much as they're saying, buy Canadian, I agree with it, right? Like, look, this jacket I'm wearing now, this is a Canadian brand, okay? These guys are, OVO is the brand, it's called October's Very Own. This jacket is made in Canada. It's a nice jacket. It was a gift. It was given to me. And I wear it because, buy Canada. I agree with it. Now, these guys are a global brand. They do collaborations with guys like the UFC, Disney. They did it with NHL. They do it with university and college campuses in Toronto. They do a lot of cool stuff. But I wear it because this is Buy Canadian, and it's very important to do. But they're a global company now, and they're branching out to e-commerce. It's a huge market for them. The question becomes, how do we keep and retain Canadian talent? And how do we continue to manufacture in a country that's very expensive to manufacture in? So what I see in there is they're not reducing the cost of business to enter, and they're not incentivizing the growth of business. They're just saying, here's money.
So I think on the surface, all this sounds really bad for Canadians.
Yeah.
Like you said, our generation's not doing as well as our parents' generation. Our child's generation is not expected to do as well as our generation. So what can Canadians do to fix all this?
I think step away and get educated is the first and foremost. I think stepping away is, whenever you're on social media or you're watching the news, it's just filled with hate. And if you step away from it, you talk to your neighbor, you talk to your friends, people are good people. Canada's still a great place. The reason why we're so passionate about it is I think a lot of us understand how amazing it is, and we want to keep it, and we want it to be as good as it can be. And there's a lot of room for improvement, but we have a lot of good things that's within the people. If you look at Canada, I tell most people that whenever I travel, I said, if you want to see the rest of the world, come to Toronto, right? I said, come here. You're going to find everything you want. And what I love about that is it's true, and I feel like 99% of Canadians are good people with good hearts. We just get lost whenever it comes to a unified message. And I think getting to know your neighbor, not spewing negative stuff online that you might not be educated on or be educated on, or try to understand the other side before you make a statement and building a bridge. I think Canadians have that. I think that's just in us. And I think that's why Canada has become such a great place to be and why the rest of the world comes here. Now, we recognize what it was having, like I was born here, I don't know about you guys, but I'm born in Toronto, it's my home and it's a great place to be. So I'm proud to be a Canadian. I think the hope comes in is the fact that we talk now about people don't know what it is to be a Canadian. I think it's changed a little bit, but I think what that means is that we have all of the world here. And I found over the last 10 years, for whatever reason, we've been focused on where we came from, not where we are. And where we are right now is a place where I think we need to connect, where it doesn't matter your religion, your background, where you grew up, is we need to reconnect on our shared values. And our shared values don't know politics. Okay, what they care about is, are you a good person? Are you respectful? I think all relationships are based on respect. People are coming here for a better life. So by design, most people here want to contribute back and be valued for that and want to be in a place that's there. And I think if you step back and you kind of look at all the amazing things, like even coming down here, seeing all the stores that are set up, stuff like, who would have thought that you'd have some of these stores here 10 years ago, 20 years ago? There is a lot of hope here. We just got to sit back and breathe a little bit and look at what's around us and talk to the people and realize they're still good here and fight for that, but don't do it in a negative way where it's destructive or it's manipulative or it's exploitive. As difficult as that is, because sometimes I find that's the nature of politics, that's the nature of being involved, is it becomes you did this and I did that and here's what we could do. But I think it could change. I think if this is ever going to change anywhere in the world for the political system to be more balanced, I think Canada's the place.